A former SEC starting quarterback recently visited the University of Utah, and how will we remember this past season for Utah football now that college football has officially ended? All that and more on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We are available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you may get your podcast. If this is your first time listening to our show, make sure you like and subscribe. Love interacting with all of you in the YouTube comments, and you can follow our show on social media at Locked On Utes on X. Today's episode of Locked On Utes is brought to you by FanDuel. You can make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. My name is JT Wistrcill, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department. And on today's show, going to be talking about a former SEC quarterback who recently visited the University of Utah. What does that mean? Also, talking about how this past season will be remembered for Utah, because with the conclusion of the national championship, the 2023-2024 college football season is officially in the books, and closing it out with a little bit of talk on the Utah men's basketball team. A couple of tough losses for them on the road over the weekend against Arizona. But first, as I mentioned, we have to start with the big news, which is all the news in college football these days, the transfer portal. Yesterday, we were talking about some additions that Utah officially made over the weekend. But while those were the main headlines, you also definitely have to discuss visits, especially when they're from quarterbacks who started in the SEC. Now, the quarterback I am referring to is a guy in Robbie Ashford, who did not light the world on fire when he started at Auburn. He started a lot more in 2022, where he completed 123 of the 250 passes he attempted. That's good for 49%. Did throw for over 1,600 yards, averaged about 6 yards a throw, 7 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, was sacked 24 times. So that's a combination of not behind the best offensive line and also him probably running into some of those sacks. And why do I bring up him running in the sacks? Well, he did run for 153 carries. He ran for 710 yards. So also had 7 touchdowns on the ground back in 2022. So what that means is he's a dual threat guy capable of making plays. He was Auburn starter back in 22, as I mentioned. Then you get Hugh Freeze coming over in there, and that is when we see him become the backup because he was beat out. So only attempted 27 passes this past season, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, only sacked 2 times though in that limited reps. Did still run the ball a decent amount though, 46 carries for 217 yards and 5 touchdowns on the ground. So when you're talking about Ashford, you're talking about a quarterback with dual threat capabilities. Also, taking a look back at just his history, he's a guy who didn't start his career at Auburn, actually started at Oregon. Coming out of there, didn't play much with the Ducks, spent 2 seasons there before coming over, spending those 2 years at the University of Auburn. But he's a guy still, because of when he enrolled in school, still has 2 years of eligibility left. So kind of crazy how that works when you have a guy who's already spent 4 years in college and still with 2 years of eligibility left. But we are still in the COVID times a little bit, so the lingering effects of that do still matter. And as I mentioned, Ashford took a visit up to Utah recently over the weekend. And sometimes with these visits, there's no real you'll hear rumors of stuff and you never know. But this one, there was literally a photo of him taken in the all white unis in the snow, which does look pretty fire. Posted on, this one comes from College Football Edits that I found posted on, and it does look good. He looks good. He looks good in all white. But I mean, it's the Utah unis. I do think those all whites, and you get the hand painted helmets. Some of those other ones in there from the past. There's a lot of good combinations you get with the Utah unis. So when talking about Robbie Ashford, how much? Well, no, I mean, yes, the interest is genuine, right? So could Ashford come to Utah? It definitely seems like there's a potential. But I'll also be honest. I would be very surprised if this happened. Now, I've been wrong before, I'll say as well. I also said I'd be very surprised if Carson Ryan ended up coming to Utah, because I'm looking at it from the Brant Kuithe, Landon King aspect. Both those guys still there. And what has now gone on to happen, you see that Carson Ryan, it looks like it's going to be a 3-headed monster at the tight end spot. So maybe Ashford is going to come, and maybe he's willing to sit behind Cam Rising. And it's based on the years he's redshirted, as we also discussed. I just have a hard time envisioning Ashford wanting to come in and be a backup again. And that's where I just look, maybe that's where his dual threat capabilities lead to this extra interest we see, because maybe it is a situation where he feels like there's a place for him to play a lot in some of those design packages. But we just saw how tough it was for Utah's offense when Cam Rising wasn't on the field. I don't have much of a desire to take Cam Rising off it, even with Ashford's exceptional athleticism. So that's just if he plays right away. If Ashford would be the backup quarterback if he transferred in. Like, no disrespect to Brandon Rose, Isaac Wilson, all the guys that Utah's got, but Ashford has actually played and started games at the collegiate level. So it's something none of those guys have done. And even though he's had some of those ups and downs again, it is against SEC, so that's still tough competition that he's faced in the past and been able to make plays. I think he'd be a really good backup quarterback for this Utah team. So obviously there were some things that appealed to him about Utah for taking the visit, but once again, this guy's just been in quarterback battles. He's been at a backup. And if he comes to Utah, it's not even a quarterback battle. Like, he's clearly the second string guy. He's fighting to be the second string guy, actually. Because as we know, that's what's one of the things that's great about Utah is you come here, you're promised pretty much nothing. Like, you can come here and they'd be like, yeah, you should win the backup job, but you're still going to have to perform and execute, go out there and make the throws, or else the Brandon Rose, the Isaac Wilsons of the world, they will pass you by. Now, once again, I think Ashford would win the job because of the experience he has, and especially just he would instantly walk in and be the most athletic quarterback in Utah's room, which is something I think provides tremendous value in certain packages. But does Ashford really want to come and be a package guy? Wouldn't he rather go somewhere he can play? That's where I think this whole thing becomes interesting. Once again, there was obviously mutual interest on both sides because he came up here, he took a visit, and he's done some nice things at the collegiate level. But, then losing your starting job in the past, I just don't see Ashford. Just in general, it's just hard for me to envision these college guys and be like, oh yeah, that guy wants to go and be a backup somewhere. That's why these things always seem interesting to me. But the fact that he came up for the visit shows the interest is legitimate. So now it's going to be interesting to see. And I think it is good from a Utah perspective. I'll say this though, that they want to bring in a veteran backup. Once again, I like Brandon Rose. I think he can be a good backup. I think he can do what Bryson Barnes has done in the past, because he was on basically equal footing with Bryson, started to turn it over a little bit, then got hurt, so fell behind Bryson, obviously, and probably would have not been the backup just because of Bryson's experience. But Bryson at a time had no experience and was a backup, came in, made plays against Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. I think that's what Brandon Rose has the potential to do for Utah coming up here in the near future this year. That's why I feel good at him as the backup quarterback. But all I'm basing that on is a gut feeling of practice reports and what we've seen in spring ball. I would feel much more comfortable if it's a guy like Ashford who has actually started games and made plays. And I think it's good that Utah is prioritizing, just because as much as I believe, obviously, with all the injury circus we went through with Cam, there shouldn't be anything by the time the fall rolls around that should rule Cam out from playing. But if he did another injury happened, this Utah team doesn't want to be left without a strong plan. And if they feel like that's Ashford, I think that makes a lot of sense. So I like that Utah is looking at veteran quarterbacks, bringing in these guys to potentially be elite level backups. And look, Ashford, as I said, probably wouldn't play a ton this year as Cam's backup, but then next year would be the front runner for the starting job because he's actually started and played games at the collegiate level, something Brandon Rose and Isaac Wilson simply just can't say. So something interesting to bear in mind. And I'm very curious to see what'll come out of Ashford's recruitment. But either way, cool that Utah is taking their backup and veteran quarterback spot seriously, trying to evaluate all their options for the 2024 season. And yes, we are on to the 2024-2025 college football season now, which is still crazy and weird to say. But before we completely leave behind the 2023 season, I thought we should look back on it from a Utah perspective and just talk about how this season should be remembered for Utah football now that the season of college football has once again come to a close. That is something we are going to be diving into in one moment. But first, want to talk to all of you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, in our friends at Jase Medical. With this show on Locked On Utes, we come here to talk about sports, just the fun and escape from some of the crazy realities of real life. But can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than someone close to me getting sick, and just while a supply chain issue keeps them from that life-saving medication they need. Thankfully, we'll all be okay because of Jase Medical. The Jase case is packed with 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sickness, skin infections, among others. This stuff can happen to any of us at any time. So visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medication will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It has never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON, capital L and O, to get $20 off your order at Jace Medical. Also want to talk to you all about one of the sponsors of today's Locked On Utes. It's our friends at UCCU. Learn and Earn, the UCCU mobile banking app that pays your entire family to learn about money. Kids look to parents to become more financially literate. Parents, they don't always know the answers. Learn and Earn breaks down financial topics into fun, bite-sized educational games like quizzes and trivia. Every time a family member completes a topic, they earn points that can occur and can be redeemed for gift cards to stores like Amazon, Apple, Sephora, Walmart, Nike, and more. There is age-appropriate content for every member of the family who can compete against each other and track their progress on leaderboards. Learn and Earn is inside the UCCU mobile banking app, so you can play it anytime, anywhere. The more you play, the more you learn. And the more you learn, the more you earn. Learn and Earn, part of UCCU's award-winning Be Money Smart youth banking program, helping kids, teens, and parents have fun while becoming more financially literate together. UCCU, love where you bank. Also, shout out Spencer McLaughlin, second segment sip. Spencer recently announced that Locked On Pac-12 is actually going to be becoming Locked On College Football now, so make sure you guys continue to support him on his channel. Does a great job. Always gave Utah fair coverage, I thought, and will continue to be a guest on this show, I'm sure, as it goes on throughout. But congrats to Spencer for keeping it going with Locked On College Football. Alrighty, speaking of college football, let's talk about the 2023-2024 Utah football season. Something we've done a fair amount on this channel, but with the conclusion of the college football season and thus the Pac-12, just a disappointing game for Washington for sure. Just on that real quick, man, look, the best team won. Michigan was the better team. They deserved to win the game, but there was a number of opportunities Washington had, whether it was the big missed throw to O'Dunes on the outside, Penix with a couple other misses, getting beat up, some tough holding calls, like going one way and not being consistent all the way throughout, but that's nitpicky stuff. Overall, Michigan was the better team. They deserved to win. Huskies didn't do a good enough job stopping the run. Credit that Michigan offensive line for executing, and Jim Harbaugh gets a win in what I do believe will be his final collegiate game before he goes on to coach the Chargers in the near future. But anyways, that did it for college football. Let's just look back now because all we can do is look back and reflect on what was another collegiate football season, as it not just relates to the overall, but of course the University of Utah, the reason all of you tune into this podcast. So when talking about the University of Utah and looking back on this season, I think it's one that can be easily described as what ifs. Because what if Cam Rising didn't get hurt? What if Brant Keithy was able to come back? And maybe instead of just Devon Vele, you have Brant Keithy. And then that's two elite pass catching options for Bryson Barnes, who was limited as a backup quarterback, absolutely. But we saw how much he was able to maximize Devon Vele. Andy Ludwig would have had some other stuff and trips up his sleeve to get Brant Keithy, who a fully healthy Brant Keithy would have been the best pass catcher on this team, I do believe, just as he was before he suffered an injury going all the way back to when he got hurt against Arizona State in 2022. Crazy how long ago that was now looking back on everything. But yeah, this is a huge season of what ifs once again. How Lander Barton maybe played his best game against USC and then gets hurt right after that. Like, what would the end of the year look like for him? Where would this Utah defense have finished statistically if Jonah Ellis, another what if, like where would he have finished sack wise? Could he have torn up the Buffs and had like a 3-sack regular season final that gives him Pac-12 Defensive Player of the Year and maybe has a chance to win some of these major defensive end awards instead of just sitting out because his final numbers weren't as great as they could have been because he missed the last two games? Cole Bishop and Sione Vaki, Sione played against Arizona. Cole did not. Corinne Reed also out. Like, if the Utah defense is 100% against Arizona, is that a game that they get off to a much better start and the wheels don't come off as quickly? So yeah, I just, once again, really think the theme this year for Utah is the what ifs. And it's a weird one too, looking back on it, right? Because I can look at the Oregon State game and be like, what if Utah had started Bryson Barnes from the start? Does Utah win that game? Probably not, but they looked a lot better with him under there than Nate Johnson. But if Utah only stuck with Bryson Barnes against Baylor, then Utah loses at Baylor. Potentially, because of the way that final drive played out. I've talked about it before, how you could see the coverage did change a little bit, but credit Nate Johnson for making those throws and making those plays. I don't say that to take anything away from Nate Johnson, but there was also a reason that as soon as Nate was inserted in the game, the offense didn't change until really that final drive in terms of finding that success throughout the game. So I just think both those things are important to mention and bring up. But yeah, just a quarterback carousel for Utah. Because of the lack of trust in quarterbacks, the offense couldn't be as explosive. So what if Mekhi Bernard doesn't get hurt? What if Jaquindon Jackson doesn't battle the anchor injuries? And, some of these are general, like every single college football team can do the what ifs and the nitpicks like I am. But still, by far, the biggest one is number one, clearly, what if Cam Rising played? And an equally big number two, what if Brant Kuithe played? Because as I look through this Utah schedule, and we did this a few weeks back when Spencer McLaughlin was on the show, I really think you look at Utah's 4 regular season losses. If Cam played, I do definitely think Utah would have beaten Northwestern with how abysmal Bryson was in that game. I feel like Utah would have beaten Oregon State, and I think they might have beaten Arizona too. Cam doesn't lose back-to-back games, and for the most part, neither does Utah in the last few years. So that's where, Oregon and Washington probably still going to be losses, but once again, like that's Utah was undefeated at home until going back to 2018 was the last time they lost at home. So that's where it's just, could Cam have propelled this offense? He's a difference maker. I really think that there's a chance Utah could have won that game. And the same thing, once again, like not every one of these what ifs would have gone Utah's way. But then I can also look at the Washington game and say, Connor O'Toole blocks that field goal. If Cam Rising is in that position to drive the field down, drive his team down the field and take the lead, I've seen him do that in some big stages and on some big moments. And he might have been able to do that. So I just have a hard time believing Utah's record would have been the same. Yes, they probably wouldn't have made a Pac-12 championship game. I don't think with the level that Bo Nix and Michael Penix and those teams were playing at this year, seemed like it was Washington and Oregon's year. But it also seemed like it was going to be USC's year last year. And Cam Rising and Utah played spoiler to that. And they didn't even get a chance to be that this year because they were without their starting quarterback. And despite what I see people saying on social media about Utah's having quarterback issues and this and that, like just any team in general really doesn't accomplish their goals without their starting quarterback. Yes, Arizona was really good this year. Still weren't in the Pac-12 championship conversation. And there's tons of other schools I could do as well that they had injuries to quarterbacks, and it's the most important position on the field. You got to be healthy in order to do things, and Utah wasn't. So that's why I think this year would have been the biggest what if, because the Utah defense was really good for the most part. Yeah, the secondary got torn apart in moments by really good quarterbacks who are going to be playing at the NFL level. Utah has a really good collegiate quarterback who's been capable of competing with those guys in the past. And that's where it just would have been interesting to see if Cam couldn't have emerged victorious in one of those shootouts with either the Huskies or the Ducks or Arizona or the Wildcats. Oregon State wasn't really a shootout, but just finding a way to win it. So once again, just a massive what if for this Utah football team because of the injuries and health. And the nice thing is Cam Rising's coming back, so we get to see what he looks like this coming year. And Brant Kuithe should also be back. A lot of these guys coming back to support this University of Utah football program, and should be a fun 2024 that we'll be breaking down as we had a long time to go till we get the next college football games. But until then, there's still a lot to talk about in terms of roster building for this team, all the news in the transfer, more recruiting stuff. Spring ball is a little over 2 months away, usually gets going kind of late March, I believe. So like 2.5 months away, basically, but lots of recruiting stuff still to dive into. As we mentioned, we'll have the second signing day later on. So lots to still discuss on Locked On Utes, and that's just not limited to football talk, because today we want to talk about the men's basketball team at the University of Utah a little bit more, and we will be diving into them in one moment. But first, I want to talk to all of you about one of the sponsors of today's episode of Locked On Utes, our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL regular season is wrapped up, but there's still time to get in on the action at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is easy to use, and there are so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can also find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and so much more. So you can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. And speaking of FanDuel, if you're looking for some NFL games to bet on this week, when it comes to the playoff time, I like betting on elite quarterbacks. And I think there are 2 elite quarterbacks in Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes of the Kansas City Chiefs and Buffalo Bills, respectively. We're going to play very well in round 1 in very favorable matchups. It's going to be very cold in Kansas City. That matchup does not favor Miami. And then as for the Bills-Steelers matchup, it's Josh Allen against Mason Rudolph. And yes, there are factors that determine the outcome of a game outside of just quarterback, but that's a little bit too drastic of a difference for me. So I do like the Chiefs and the Bills to cover. But if you want some NFL action and just see what's going on in the world around sports gambling, that's what FanDuel Sportsbook is for. All righty, closing this one out. Talking about Utah men's basketball. What a season it's been for the Utah men's basketball team, at least starting wise, but unfortunately hit a little bit of a road bump this weekend. Taking on Arizona State. That Arizona State drop to Arizona State and Arizona. We'll get into both those in a second. Not disappointed to lose at Arizona, but Arizona State is the one. Utah still 11-3, still sitting good over, or excuse me, still 11-4 if you count the Arizona loss. So still fine overall. And these aren't bad losses, but once you would have just liked to see the team, find way to get out and win in it. First, the Arizona State game. That's one where, Brandon Carlson had his 19 points as well, but Gabe Madsen only with 3 points there. And, just in general, when you have a starting lineup that Raleigh Wooster only with 9, or just the starters in general, no one else in double figure scoring, that's obviously going to hurt you, at least in the starting lineups. Davion Smith got 13, but he did it on 14 shots. So that's where it just gets tough if you're Utah. Utah only making 7 threes in that game to 12 for the Sun Devils too. And that's where you just got to give Arizona State credit for being the more fit, being the team that finds a way to win. I mean, they led by as much as 17 in this game. So they defended their home court well, and Utah dropped one to the Sun Devils. Then looking at the game against Arizona, look, Arizona is a top 10 team. I know they have 3 losses now. One of those was to Stanford, but because Stanford was the one that kind of punched them in the mouth, you knew they were going to come out ready for Utah. And then they punched Utah in the mouth. This wasn't like last year where Utah caught them sleeping at the Huntsman. Now, granted, Arizona, this one was played in Tucson, but still a game where Brandon Carlson only with 7 points. He was 3 of 10 shooting from the field. It's good to see Gabe Madsen bounce back with 18. Him and Bajema combined to hit 6 threes for this Utah team. Also adding Ben Carlson having 10 in off the bench. But look, when you're talking about Ballo having 17, Pele with his 13 a little bit, and Caleb Love's been a great addition for them. He had 23 here too. They scored 50 points in the second half to only 34 for Utah. So Arizona's clearly a better team right now, but I'm very curious to see if Utah does a better job. And they made 10 more field goals than Utah too. So that's another one where it's just like and out rebounded Utah by 18. You're not going to win games when you have those statistics that are lopsided against you, although the turnovers, nearly Arizona turning over 17 times, nearly helped Utah get in it. But then the points in the paint being 50-26, or the fast break points being 20-5 in favor of the Wildcats, very much so hurt Utah. And a couple of disappointing and tough not disappointing, but a couple of tough losses for this Utah men's basketball team. But now have an opportunity to come home against UCLA, struggling a little bit this year. And then after that, they got to go on the road against Stanford. But definitely a very winnable stretch for Utah, because then you get Oregon State. Oregon's up and down too. There's not a ranked team on Utah's schedule again until they go out and face Arizona. Now, Colorado's pretty good. Maybe they could get ranked again. They've been kind of hovering around that same area. So things to watch for, but still 11-4, 4th in the Pac-12 currently. Got to feel good about Craig Smith and co. Team with legit star power in Brandon Carlson and, Gabe Madsen, Cole Bajema, just these other role players that are able to pitch in and contribute. Lots of other guys I can mention in those spots too. Raleigh Wooster are comfortable in the point guard position. So feeling good about the state of Utah men's basketball, and also still feeling good about the Utah women's basketball team, even though they suffered a loss. That's one thing we'll dive into on tomorrow's show, is the Utah women's basketball team, as well as more Utah football news. We look forward to having you join us then.